We are in Luke chapters 8 and 9. We are coming, this is the third of the Gospels. So a number of these stories we've heard a couple of times, parables, different things. So I'm not going to cover everything in all the detail as per usual, but I'm just sort of saying specifically this one, there's some cool parables and whatever, but we've already talked about a lot of it. And we've covered the sower a few times and why God uses such parables. I will say, just sort of as a side comment, a personal, I guess, pastoral comment, if you want to. I think, these stories here, this parable, it talks about the different types of people that, have the word of God spoken into their life, and they respond to it in different ways. Some of them hear that word, get really excited, and then when the first difficulty comes, it gets choked out. Other ones who heard and they go on their way, but they get sort of caught up in the world with worries and riches and pleasures, and they never really produce any fruit, right? Those types of stories, which are similar to the Proverbs. And I think, a lot of people say, well, shouldn't really apply that to people because that's rude or judgmental. And I don't actually think that is true. I think God would like for us to sort of think through this. He's given us this parable. This is what's happening to people. You should observe that in your life. That doesn't mean you go out and start scolding everybody you see because, they are like the thorns in this parable. But it is important for you to observe that because that's how you become more mature. You start to observe and say, is that me? Am I getting choked up in the worries of this life? Am I getting choked up in the pleasures of this life, right? Was I really on fire for this? And then the first time something bad happened, I moved on from God, or I don't lean into him when these difficulties come. So I think that's good. And it's good to share even with your children. You don't randomly go to everybody in church and say, oh, look at that. They're really on thorny ground. But at the same time, sometimes there are places where you might talk to another believer and say, I see that person. They seem to be struggling with this. I wonder if there's a way we can help them. That's not gossipy. That's you trying to actually, as we talked about with empathy, you're standing on the shore. You're wanting to pull people out onto the shore with you. So just sort of a note on that, because sometimes people are very, you don't judge to the point of, you can't actually observe what's going on around you. And I think the Bible is clear over and over and over again. You are supposed to observe what's going on. And you're supposed to see, hey, that person made some poor choices. That led to some poor consequences. Maybe I ought not to do that. So that's an important life lesson of seeing these people that are not living by God's word and not living by God's ways. And they reap the consequences of that, right? So continues on the true relationships. We covered this one. There's actually more context in some of the other gospels where it's basically, Mary and his brothers come and say, hey, they want to see you. And he sort of blows them off. When you have all of the context, it is basically that they are actually actively pushing back against his mission. They're saying he should not be off doing and saying the things that he's doing. And Jesus's response is to say, hey, I have a first duty to those that are in my flock that are believing members, of which eventually his family becomes. And when he's on the cross, he says very specifically, here, John, this is my mother, you're taking care of her now. So he does fulfill the duties of a son, looking out for his parents. But he also prioritizes God and God's family first. He had a mission from God to do certain things while he was here, and that is his first priority. Then his priority to his family. So you have the story where the waves obey him. This is one of the first ones in Luke, not the first, but one of the early ones where he commands nature. And that is a big difference. So again, I just sort of mentioned that as we go through these different stories, healing is something that is not necessarily common back then, but it's something that's more understandable. It's easy. When someone actually controls nature, that is a different type of miracle. So to them, that they would understand this as, hey, wait a second, this is a different beast entirely. This guy can actually control the wind and the waves. Like, whoa, wait a second here. Who is this? So that's a pretty big statement. Then you get the pigs and the demon story. We went through that in quite a bit of detail. I think it was Mark that we went through this one in detail. So, but he runs into the demon, and what do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torment me. So he gets sent into the pigs. Pigs go into the ocean. Again, the response of the people is the mind. Obviously, everybody wants to get caught up in demons and pigs and what is going on here. But again, the people's response is actually one of the key parts of this story. So they went to see what happened, and they come out, and Jesus is sitting there with this crazy man that they had shackled down and broke chains. And he's sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid. So afraid, they asked Jesus to leave. It's like, right? But the man who he restored his mind wants to follow him. Like, he wants to be a disciple. He gets it. He's like, whoa, this guy healed me. Everybody else seals his healing and says, how about you leave now? They're actually so scared by the miracle that has happened. You get the story of the woman who was bleeding for 12 years. As always, virtually every time, I don't say always, but often, many times, Jesus says, your faith has saved you, right? It is your belief in Jesus, that he is the Messiah, and that he is who he says he is, and does what he says he does, that saves you. And that is the end of chapter 8. And we will move into chapter 9. Where Jesus is commissioning the 12, right? So he pulls them all together, and he gives them power and authority over demons and to heal diseases, and he sends them out, right? Again, that slight difference where controlling the wind of the waves is actually a distinction that would be key to them. So he sends them out to dispel demons and heal diseases and proclaim the kingdom of God and heal the sick, right? So he's coming to right this brokenness that has come into the world after Adam and Eve fall. This sickness and brokenness comes into the world. Jesus comes and he starts pushing back on that immediately and says, I'm going to start pushing back and saying, hey, I'm going to introduce my kingdom here by pushing back there. So you have Herod, who desires to see Jesus, but does not. He said basically he's not sure what's going on. If it was beheaded John, as he's hearing stories come back to life, that's Jesus. But he will eventually get to speak to Jesus, but Jesus doesn't talk to him. I think it's chapter 23, maybe. Do I have that written down somewhere? Yeah, chapter 23. Where Jesus is on his way to the cross. He actually comes to Herod first, but he doesn't speak to him. There is the feeding of the 5,000. We've gone through there. Peter's confession of the Messiah. So Jesus says, finally, this is the switch where he's sort of moving towards Jerusalem at this point. He will have the statement that he's moving on briefly, but it all starts with Jesus saying, who do you say that I am? And Peter answers, you are the Messiah, right? And he explains, it is necessary for the Son of Man, so the term he likes to use for himself from Daniel. So the Son of Man arrives and is also God in that vision, right? So he's the Son of Man to suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, be killed and raised on the third day. So he gives them the whole story right there, right? Then he says, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Again, sort of side note, he has not gone to the cross yet, which is quite an obvious statement, right? But the context is these people wouldn't be familiar with the story of Jesus going to the cross, right? So if you're picking up your cross and following me, one, it's like you had to carry your own cross if you were guilty, is the general understanding. It's in a couple of historical references of that time that if you were guilty of a crime, they say you should have to carry your own cross. And it's a very sort of shameful sentence, right? So what Jesus is saying here, you're going to be called guilty and shamed, and anything that could and should be bad is going to happen to you if you want to follow me, right? And that's not easy, because that's what he just said. I'm going to be killed by all these people. If you want to take up your cross and follow me, this isn't going to be a happy-go-lucky journey. And it's not for his disciples, right? plain and simple. But what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? Or his soul is some of the other translations, right? So if you're ashamed of the Son of Man, he'll be ashamed of you when he comes into his glory. So that's a tough one to follow up. So then we have the transfiguration. He goes up the mountain, and there's references to which mountain and other things in some of the other Gospels, but not so much this one. It happens pretty quick here. He just goes up the mountain to pray, and he is suddenly transfigured. Moses and Elijah appear, and this is, I think I actually referenced Luke in the previous videos, but this is a great sentence. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. So you could say that his departure he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. You could say, in theory, that that is him being raised up to heaven. But the word departure here could actually be translated Exodus, and I would argue, as we read Exodus at the same time. I like these sort of overlaps, these parallels, right? That is God rescuing his people from this horrible life. And obviously his death on the cross is compared quite often to that salvation of the people in the Old Testament, of God's people. And it is rescuing people today from sin and death is paralleled with that sort of redemption and Passover event that happens to the people in the Old Testament. So if you say they appeared in glory and we're speaking of his exodus, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem, I think that would be a much more powerful, a much better statement of saying he's speaking about the new exodus that's going to happen, right? The real exodus. That was a shadow of what was happening. This is going to be the real thing, the exodus that he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. And Peter says, oh, hey, maybe I can build some houses for the three of you because you guys are all three important people, right? Not knowing what he was saying. What that means is he doesn't realize that, Jesus is Jesus fully. He's he grew up with Moses and Elijah being like these larger than life crazy people in the story, right? So if he sees those two people and he's been walking with Jesus all the time, he's sort of like, wow, you're three great people. And Jesus sort of, or God sort of corrects him. This is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him! Exclamation point, right? So not to be mean, but don't build three houses. We got a priority here that's going on. And then he continues on his journey, comes down. There was a large crowd with a demon, and his disciples weren't able to drive it out. And I love this gentle, kind, always loving Jesus. He replied, "You unbelieving and perverse generation." He's speaking to his own disciples. He's not speaking to the Pharisees at this point. He's speaking to his own friends and disciples that he's been traveling with. "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long will I be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." So he's completely flabbergasted by his own disciples. Like, how long do I have to put up with you people? So clearly not long. Second prediction of his death. Let these words sink in. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. So then they get into argument about who's the greatest. He uses a little child as the example. And then here is, I was mentioning before, the sort of statement where the journey to Jerusalem is happening. When the days were coming to a close for him to be taken up, he set his face. He determined to journey to Jerusalem. Basically, it says he stiffened his face is probably the best, most actual translation. He stiffened his face to go to Jerusalem, which is basically like he said his jib. He's like, this is where I am now, going. And he sent messengers ahead of him. So he sent messengers ahead, and the messengers were rejected. And I love James and John are like, what? You rejected Jesus? Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them? You can almost see they'd be like, I could see my two boys doing that. Like, if they were following Jesus, like, whoa, they rejected you, Jesus. You want us to call down fire and destroy them? Interestingly, 55, 56 are really short, but he turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. There is actually in some transcripts, some early manuscripts, a little bit extra. There's another sentence that says, "You don't know what kind of spirit you belong to, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy people's lives, but to save them." So that is in another, at least some of the early manuscripts might explain why that's sort of a short sentence. It's plugged in between them, actually, between 55 and 56. So then, following Jesus, it finishes up with that and says there's a couple of people that say, hey, they want to follow Jesus. He said to one, "Follow me." And Lord, he said, "First let me go and bury my father," which it sounds horrible when Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead. Again, though, understand, when they said this in Israel, this is a long process, meaning this could be like a year-long process of burying your father. Their procedure is quite long. And then first let me go and say goodbye to those at my house. Again, that was probably going to be a lengthy process. But it is, in some ways, Jesus also saying, look, you got to understand, if you really want to walk this walk, you've got a new priority and a singular priority of making Jesus Lord of your life, which is a tough one for all of us every day. So that is the good example laid down by Jesus to say, you got to be able to walk away from everything if that is what is required. And obviously we've all read stories of missionaries and different people that needed to do that God placed that upon them. So I pray that we are all strong enough to make that decision if and when it ever comes before us as well. That we always place Jesus first, and God's will on our life above all things. So pray that you are blessed and keep reading.